Microsoft Windows 7. It's the latest Windows operating system to date. Now, it's been a long time in development, but it's finally here. Over the course of these videos, you're going to come to realise that Windows 7 isn't just an incremental upgrade to its predecessor Windows Vista. It's certainly much more than that. With its flashy new interface and usability features, it's streets ahead of any previous version of Windows. At least at this time when this video is being recorded, Windows 7 is supposed to be available in 6 different versions. There's going to be a starter edition that won't be available in retail packaging. This one's really aimed at OEMs. Home Basic is an entry-level version aimed at emerging markets, and that's not going to include features like Windows Media Center. So therefore, if you want to buy Windows 7 Home Edition, you're going to be getting the premium version. Now, there's also 2 different business editions here. We have the Professional Edition and the Enterprise Edition, with the Enterprise Edition supporting some new features like direct access and virtual hard disk booting. And finally, there's a version here called Ultimate. So at a glance, the main differences between these versions of Windows 7 is that our Home Editions here, these include some entertainment features that aren't found in our Business Editions, but the Business Editions, they include some management features that you won't find in the Home Editions. But if you want it all, I suspect that, like me, you're going to go for the Ultimate Edition, which includes everything. So whichever version of Windows 7 that you decide to buy, you'll have roughly the same set of hardware requirements that you'll need to meet in order to install the product. So Microsoft has broken down the requirements in 2 ways. If you want to meet the actual minimum hardware requirements, you're going to need at least a 1 GHz CPU, 512 megabytes of RAM for the Home Basic Edition of Windows 7, but 1 gig of RAM for all of the other editions. You'll need about 15 gigs of hard disk space, a video card that's capable of running DirectX version 9, a monitor running 800 by 600 resolution, and you'll need something like a DVD drive if you happen to be installing from Optical Media. So that's what Microsoft say. Now, whilst a PC with these low specifications will indeed install and run Windows 7, it won't be a pleasurable experience, even though it will run better than Vista did on the same hardware. And it won't display the new Great Aero interface, which gives you those nice new translucent features. So if you do want to run Aero in Windows 7, you'll need to ensure that your video card not only supports DirectX 9, but also has at least 128 megabytes of memory. Now here's the good news. The good news is that almost every computer that's come out in the last 2 or more years will meet and exceed these specifications anyway, so it's not really likely that you won't be able to run Windows 7 on the PC that you're using right now, unless it's a real clunker. I mean, even netbook PCs, which are hardly known for their power, they can run Windows 7 just fine, so a real PC or a real notebook shouldn't have any problems. So with all that in mind, let's define what I think a real computer running Windows 7 should have. Now, this is purely my own opinion though, this isn't anything official from Microsoft. They are correct, Windows 7 will run with the specifications you see here. But if you really want to enjoy your computing experience and you don't want to be sitting around, you won't use a 1 GHz CPU for a start, and we won't be settling on 1 gig of RAM. So in my opinion, you're going to want at least a 2 GHz CPU and at least 2 gigabytes of RAM. And if you plan on playing games or running Blu-ray movies and doing things like that on your PC, video encoding, don't get yourself a standard onboard Intel 128 meg card. Sure, it will run Aero, but not much else. You can get yourself a nice graphics card, and you don't have to spend $500, $600, $700 on one, unless you're a hardcore gamer. Even $100 or even $200, that'll get you a nice fast graphics card, and you'll be glad that you got it. Now the same goes with hard disks. They're pretty cheap nowadays, and if you're building a new PC, these 500 gig drives, they're pretty much entry level. I mean, we have 1 and 2 terabyte drives around now, so a 500 gig one really ought to be the entry-level drive. In fact, I'd be surprised with these 500 gig drives. They're so cheap nowadays, they're almost giving themselves away. So there's really no reason why people shouldn't be able to exceed these recommendations and get themselves a really nice machine to run Windows 7. In fact, like I said, you're probably fine that your existing PC is going to run Windows 7 just fine. If you're upgrading from Vista, then you probably already have a machine which will run it. You probably don't need to change anything. If you've got a modern PC running Windows XP, again, you probably not need to do anything. But anyway, these are the minimums as defined by Microsoft. So just make sure that you've got a PC or a notebook that meets them, and you can begin installing Windows 7. Okay, so rather than making this a long, drawn-out video telling you all about the new features of Windows 7, let's just install the product, and we'll see what's new and how it can benefit you over the rest of this video series. So what I've done is I've gone ahead and I've placed the Windows 7 DVD on my drive and started up my computer. And the first thing that Windows 7 Setup is going to do is load up some files that Setup needs to begin the installation and boot into the GUI mode that you see here. So the installation of the base files has completed, and Setup here requires us to define firstly the language that we want to use when we install Windows 7, the time and currency format, and what type of keyboard layout we're using. Now you could choose whatever fits your location from this list, although the defaults are most likely going to be the correct choices already, so I'm simply going to click Next. Well, now we're ready to install Windows 7 on our computer, and if you like though, over here on the left with this first hyperlink, you can read some inbuilt information about things you should know before installing Windows 7, although this help file really only details obvious things like making sure you've got your Windows license key handy and things like that, but feel free to read it in your own time. Now, if you're currently having problems with a previous Windows 7 operating system, we can click on the Repair Your Computer link, and this will bring up a new window that allows you to attempt to repair Windows 7. Now, do note that this will only repair Windows 7 and Windows Vista machines, not any other versions of Windows that happen to be older than Windows Vista. And since this is a new computer that I'm installing Windows 7 on, you can see that this window here is blank, and I obviously don't have any previous versions listed. So we'll cancel this by clicking the X here in the top right corner of this window, and we'll begin installing Windows 7 by clicking on Install Now. Now, a good little tip that some of you more advanced users might like is that once you're this far into the installation of Windows 7, like with Windows Vista, if you hold down the Shift key on your keyboard and hit F10, you'll see a command prompt window fire up there, which you're able to use should you need access to a command prompt at any time during the installation. Alright, well, let's go back to our installation wizard here, and we'll need to accept the terms that Microsoft have set out for using Windows 7. So have a read of these terms if you like. We'll check the box here to accept these terms, and then we'll click Next. Okay, so do we want to upgrade a previous Windows operating system or install a new one? Well, since this is a new computer without any other operating system on it, we're going to choose Custom, since this is the correct option for installing a brand new copy of Windows on our computer. And then we'll need to choose where we want to install it. Now on my computer here, I only have a single hard disk, so I'll leave the default to install it on disk 0, which will become my C drive. But if you'd like to perform some additional actions on your disks, like extend them or format them before you install Windows 7, you can click on the Drive Options Advanced link here. And from here you have the ability to modify your drives and partitions before you go ahead and start the actual installation. Now over here on the left, you'll also note that you have the ability to load any drivers that might be required by your drives or your drive controller if it's not already recognized by Windows 7. So if at the top here you don't see any drives, you'll probably require a driver disk from the vendor of your hardware, which you'll then be able to load in, and then you'll be able to see your drives and modify them as you like. Right, well, I'm happy to simply leave my default drive as it is. I'll click Next, and then Windows 7 will begin copying the files it needs to my hard drive and start installing our new operating system. So as you would expect, this is going to take a while since we are installing an operating system here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pause the video and we'll return once the setup has copied all of the files it needs to our hard drive and again needs some input from us. So we'll pause the video and we'll be back shortly. Alright, well, Windows 7 has now been installed, so it's now asking us to create a user account. Now this user account will be the administrator user account for this computer, so it's going to have permission to do pretty much anything it wants on this computer. So we'll need to type in a name for the user of this PC here. Now I'm just going to give my account a name of Trainer, and then we'll also need to enter in a name for our computer as well, which does default to whatever you typed in as your username, -PC. And you can certainly change that if you like, and you guys listening probably will change it since that's not really a great name, at least not in my opinion anyway. So I'm actually going to change this. I'm just going to call mine Windows 7, just for the purposes of these videos, and we'll click Next. So the next step here is to enter in a password for our user account. So I'm going to type that in, a password, and I'll need to retype it in just to confirm that I spelt it all correctly. And you'll also need to provide a password hint as well. And this can be used to prompt you to what your password is in case you happen to forget it. So I'm just going to type in password here and we'll click Next. Okay, well, we can now set up how Windows is going to be updated. The default is to use the recommended settings, and in most cases, that's probably what you should choose. But you could also choose to only install important updates, or to not install anything at all, and then you can do it yourself manually. Of course, the only problem with doing it manually is like with doing backups. You start with good intentions, and then you forget about doing it. So I'm going to use the recommended settings, so my Windows 7 operating system can be patched automatically when new bug and security vulnerabilities are found and patches are made available. So I'll set mine to use the recommended settings, and now we'll need to set the time zone for where our computer lives in the world, as well as the date and the time. So just double check that everything here is correct. You can easily change these later on if you don't select the right settings. I'll just accept these default. We'll click Next. And finally, we'll need to tell Windows 7 where this computer is located in order for it to choose the correct network security settings. So we've got options to set this to a home network, a work network, or a public network. Now, home and work networks are both very similar in that they'll be expecting you to be connected to other computers in a local network scenario or connected to the internet through a router. Now, if your computer is in a public location or directly connected to the internet via dial-up or perhaps directly through DSL or cable modem without being behind a firewall or a router, then choosing the public option is the best since Windows 7 will be loaded with more secure settings. So whatever you choose here, we can of course change these later on. So I'm going to choose a work network, and then Windows 7 will go off, it'll finalize all the settings that it needs to, and we're basically done here because in a moment Windows 7 is going to load up into the desktop and we'll be done. And there it is, Windows 7 is now installed and we're ready to roll. We're ready to install applications, connect to the internet and do whatever we like. So as you've seen, installing Windows 7 isn't a difficult thing to do at all, but like installing most Windows operating systems, it will take a while as there's a lot of stuff that needs to be installed. So now that Windows 7 is installed, we can move on and we can start enjoying all of the new features of Windows 7. So we hope you've enjoyed this video and would like to thank you for watching.